The alarms began at midnight, a hollow metallic hum that shivered through the steel floor and settled in my chest like a second heartbeat. I'd been told on my first day that Rule 1, never step outside during a drill. No matter what you hear was the only rule that mattered, but nobody explained why. The supervisor just handed me a laminated card, patted my shoulder and said, "You'll understand when the wind changes." Now, as the sirens trembled through the rig's skeleton, I understood nothing except that the air felt wrong, thick and almost humming. I pushed open the small window above the console to look outside. The floodlights cut narrow cones through a curtain of mist, but the ocean beyond was invisible, a seamless black surface stretching forever. The drills were supposed to start at dawn, yet here we were wrapped in fog and panic, alarms screaming as if the sea itself were angry. I saw shapes moving near the far platform, slow, deliberate motions that looked too smooth to be men. My radio crackled, then fell silent, leaving me with the hum of the rig and the faint echo of waves slapping the metal supports below. The control room felt smaller by the minute. Every sound carried chains clinking, turbines sighing, distant boots pacing across the upper deck. I checked the monitors, but half of them were static. The few that still worked showed nothing, except the steady rhythm of machinery running itself. Somewhere deep inside the rig, a heavy door slammed, the vibration rolling up through the floor plates. I wanted to believe it was just pressure or wind, but the noise had intention, as if someone or something had closed it carefully. I tried to call out over the intercom, my voice shaking. "Control to drill team. Confirm status." Nothing but feedback answered me. I turned to the emergency logbook, flipping through pages of notes left by previous watchmen. Most were technical, pressure readings, shift changes, safety checks, but near the back, a few lines were scribbled in a different hand, uneven, rushed letters that said, "Don't open the door when they call your name." My throat tightened. The handwriting trailed off mid-sentence, ink smeared as if the writer had been pulled away before finishing. I checked the clock, 12:30. The alarm stopped without warning. The silence that followed was worse, pressing against the walls like a living thing. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, quick and uncertain. When the radio hissed again, I nearly dropped it. A voice came through, quiet and wet, as though speaking through water. "Open the hatch." The words stretched, distorted, impossible to locate. I froze, staring at the speaker grill. The voice sounded like mine. I stood perfectly still, afraid that any motion would confirm the voice's reality. The window's reflection caught my face, pale and unfamiliar in the flickering light. "You shouldn't be here," I whispered to myself, though I wasn't sure which of us I meant. The ocean outside had gone completely still. No movement, no wind, no rhythm of waves against steel. The rig felt suspended between worlds, a steel island anchored to nothing. I remembered the supervisor's smile, too calm, almost rehearsed. "The rule isn't to keep you in," he'd said once during inspection. "It's to keep something else out." I wanted to believe this was a malfunction, a storm disrupting the instruments, but storms made noise. This quiet was deliberate. I leaned closer to the radio, listening for breath, static, anything human. Instead, I heard a faint tapping, rhythmic, slow, echoing through the ventilation ducts. It sounded like someone walking barefoot through the upper corridors, pausing between steps. I knew everyone had orders to shelter in the lower maintenance bay during a drill, yet the steps circled directly above me. I moved to the control panel, fingers trembling, and initiated a system scan. Every sensor reported normal atmospheric pressure. No wind, no movement detected outside. Still, I felt the faint vibration of footsteps above, aligning perfectly with my heartbeat, until I couldn't tell which was which. Then the lights dimmed. The emergency bulbs flickered to life, painting the room in pale red. That was the signal for containment. Something outside the rig had triggered the failsafe. I backed away from the console. The reflection in the window changed. The outline no longer matched my movements. When I leaned forward, it stayed still, its head tilted just slightly, as though studying me. I told myself it was a trick of the red lights and condensation on the glass, but the longer I watched, the clearer it became. Someone was standing outside, inches from the window, where the narrow walkway met open air. The figure didn't breathe, didn't move, but I could feel it stare through the fog. The radio hissed again. "Drill complete," the same voice said, calm and flat. "You can come outside now." My hand reached toward the door lever, before I realized it wasn't my decision. The muscles in my arm moved on their own, guided by the pull of that voice. I forced my eyes shut, bit my tongue, anything to anchor myself to pain and reality. Somewhere deep inside the rig, machinery groaned as pressure equalized, a sound like the ocean inhaling. Then, as quickly as it had come, the fog began to thin. The floodlights flickered back to white, washing the walkway in colorless brightness. The figure outside dissolved into mist, leaving only faint footprints leading toward the ladder. I stumbled back to the console, hit the override switch, and locked every hatch in sequence. The system registered a sealed perimeter, but one external door, the one outside the control room, remained marked as ajar. I didn't check it. I couldn't. Instead, I sat against the wall and waited for dawn, counting the seconds until shift change. The manual said drills were routine, nothing to fear, but I knew better now. Something was testing us, using the alarms as bait. Maybe that's what happened to the others, the ones whose handwriting filled the back pages of the logbook. When morning finally came, the sea returned to its usual restlessness, waves lapping against the rig's columns as if nothing had happened. The new watchman arrived with a thermos of coffee and the same tired smile I'd worn yesterday. I told him to memorize the rules, especially the first one. He laughed, thinking it was just procedure, just superstition. I didn't argue. Some lessons can't be explained. They have to be survived. As I handed over the shift log, the intercom clicked to life again. The voice that came through wasn't mine this time, and it wasn't his either. It was older, slower, whispering the same phrase on repeat. "Drill complete. Come outside." The new watchman frowned, moving toward the door, and I caught his arm before he could reach it. The metal beneath our feet vibrated once, softly, like a heartbeat returning after a pause. I told him firmly, "Don't ever step outside during the drills." The lights flickered again, and the sea fell silent. After the second night, I started to understand the rhythm of the rig, the hum of turbines, the creak of cables swaying against the current, the way the air itself seemed to breathe. Rule 2. Keep the floodlights on, even when the ocean looks calm. The card said it like a suggestion, but after what I'd seen, I read it as a warning carved in steel. The calm, I'd learned, was never calm. It was the ocean waiting for us to blink. And last night, for one moment, I think we did. The maintenance logs showed a brief power fluctuation at 2:13, just 2 seconds, barely enough for the systems to notice. But I'd been awake, watching the monitors when the floodlights blinked off. For that heartbeat of darkness, the rig became an island swallowed by infinite black, and something moved in that blackness, something big enough to eclipse the stars. When the lights returned, the surface was empty again. Too empty, the waves unnaturally still, as if frozen mid-motion. I told myself it was just a shadow, maybe a cloud, but there were no clouds. At breakfast, no one mentioned it. The crew ate quietly, their eyes fixed on the steel tables, spoons clinking like metronomes. I looked around and realized one seat was empty. Keller's. He'd been the one checking the power conduits during the outage. I asked where he was, but the supervisor only said, "He's been reassigned to shore." That was strange. The supply boat hadn't come in days. The others nodded as if they'd heard the same story before, then changed the subject to weather reports that never changed. By noon, I went down to the subdeck to check the electrical systems myself. The air there smelled like salt and metal. Every pipe sweated condensation, dripping onto the grated floor in rhythmic plinks. The main power panel showed no sign of damage, but one breaker was warm to the touch. pulsing faintly beneath my fingers. When I pulled my hand away, I noticed something slick on the glove, a residue colorless and viscous, that shimmered faintly under the flashlight. I wiped it off quickly, though it seemed to resist the motion, stretching like thread before finally snapping. The humming of the generators changed pitch, a low vibration that climbed slowly into a higher tone. I turned, expecting to see someone behind me, but the corridor was empty. The walls looked wet now, though I couldn't tell if it was condensation or something else. My footsteps echoed longer than they should have, like there was space beyond the metal, a hollow beneath the rig that wasn't supposed to exist. I kept moving, counting each step, trying not to listen to the faint lapping sound coming from the floor grates. Back in the control room, I turned every floodlight to maximum. The brightness poured across the decks, reaching far into the mist, cutting the sea into moving ribbons of silver. The other operators complained about power draw, but I didn't care. I'd rather drain the reserves than sit here in the dark again. Still, even under full illumination, I swore I saw movement at the edge of the light's reach, shapes rising and sinking just below the water's skin, like the ocean was breathing creatures of its own. Around midnight, the calm came again. The wind stopped, the rig's sway stilled, and every sound dulled to a soft hum. The floodlights flickered once, then steadied. I leaned closer to the window. The surface of the water was smooth, mirror-like, reflecting the rig upside down with impossible clarity. And in that reflection, I saw figures standing along the walkway, tall, motionless outlines, too many to be crew. I looked up, expecting to see them on deck, but the walkway was empty. Only in the reflection did they remain, staring upward at me. The intercom crackled. "You're wasting power," said a voice I didn't recognize. "Turn the lights off. It's calm now." The static that followed almost sounded like laughter, low, gurgling, wet. I didn't answer. Instead, I locked the controls and backed away from the console. The floodlights dimmed slightly on their own, as if responding to that unseen command. I grabbed the manual override lever and forced them back to full power. Somewhere far below, I heard a screech, like metal bending under pressure, then a deep splash. The rig shuddered, tools rattled off the walls. The sea erupted just beyond the floodlight's edge, a plume of water and mist that reached stories high, then fell back with a thunder that shook my ribs. The lights caught a glimpse of something vast beneath the surface, scales reflecting silver and gray, before vanishing again. The motion knocked one of the smaller cranes sideways. It groaned, cables snapping before swinging back into place, as if tugged by unseen hands. Then the calm returned, too sudden, too complete. When dawn came, the ocean looked harmless again. A few gulls circled lazily overhead, and the air smelled faintly of oil and salt. The other crew members avoided the windows. No one mentioned the quake or the missing crane. Keller's name was erased from the shift log, as if he'd never existed. I added a note of my own instead. Never trust the calm. Keep the lights on. Later that afternoon, while inspecting the outer deck, I found a boot wedged beneath the safety railing. The tag inside read Keller. The leather was soaked through, but the laces were tied. I dropped it back into the sea before anyone could see. Some things didn't belong topside. By evening, I noticed small handprints on the exterior of the glass. They weren't smudges, more like impressions pressed from the outside too deep to make sense. The sea had risen slightly, brushing the lower rungs of the ladder that should have been several feet above water level. I turned every light back on, flooding the horizon with blinding white. The shadows fled instantly, leaving only the rippling reflection of the rig, and just for a second, an open eye staring up from beneath the surface. The supervisor came by, during the next shift. He looked tired, his skin pale under the fluorescence. "You've been using too much power," he said flatly. "We can't keep this up." I told him what I saw, what I heard, but his expression didn't change. "That's what they all say," he murmured, half to himself. Then louder, "Stick to your post. Follow the rules." As he left, I noticed the same residue glistening on his boots that I'd seen in the subdeck, thin colorless threads that trailed slightly as he walked. That night, I sat watching the monitors again, lights blazing across the rig like a fortress against the void. The ocean was mirror still once more, the horizon swallowed in darkness. I knew it was waiting. Every instinct screamed to keep watching, not to blink, not to let the light falter. Hours passed, my eyes burned, but I stayed, gripping the console, until the first orange line of sunrise cut across the water. When the shift ended, I finally exhaled. The floodlights powered down one by one, hissing softly as they cooled. For the first time, I thought maybe I'd survived the night without incident. But as the last bulb faded, I saw it etched faintly into the inside of the glass where my reflection should have been. A message drawn in streaks of that same shimmering residue. "Keep the lights on. It's not the dark you should fear. It's what remembers you there." When the floodlights finally dimmed and the horizon turned gray, I thought the worst was over. I logged the power cycles, signed the report, and watched the sea roll back into its endless rhythm. That's when I remembered Rule 3. Never answer the radio after midnight. It was printed halfway down the rule card, almost as an afterthought, but the handwriting looked newer, darker ink, fresher paper. I told myself it was superstition, a leftover note from the last Watchman, yet the way the letters pressed into the card felt almost carved rather than written. The day passed quietly. No one mentioned the lights, or Keller, or the residue that had shimmered on the window. The supervisor whistled while checking fuel levels, his tune slightly off-key, repeating the same 4 notes over and over. I tried focusing on routine, pressure gauges, oxygen intake, deck stability, but each sound felt too crisp, too deliberate, as if the ocean had learned to mimic human rhythm. I kept catching glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye, ropes swaying without wind, shadows bending the wrong way under sunlight. By the time the evening shift started, the air grew heavy again. The mist rolled in from nowhere, swallowing the horizon, until the rig felt stranded in a gray void. I double-checked every console, made sure the lights were locked to full power, then settled near the comms desk. The radio had been quiet all day. Still, I stared at it the way you stare at a sleeping animal, knowing it will wake eventually. The little green indicator blinked once, a slow pulse like a heartbeat. At 23:57, the first sound came, a faint hum threaded through static, irregular but rhythmic. It didn't match any known channel, so I turned the dial to clear it. The hum stopped instantly. For a full minute the speakers hissed softly, then a voice whispered, "Copy." The sound was watery, distorted, the vowels stretched like they were traveling from miles below. I didn't move. "Copy," the voice repeated, this time closer. I reached out, hesitated, then pulled my hand back. Answering felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. The seconds crawled. I could hear my pulse louder than the static. Then the voice changed, pitch lower, tone more familiar. It sounded like Keller. "You left the lights on," it said. Each word slow, deliberate. "We can't see in the glare." My throat tightened. I glanced toward the windows, but the floodlights burned bright and empty. "Where are you?" I asked before I could stop myself. The radio clicked twice, and silence swallowed the room. Immediately the rig's ambient hum deepened, like something massive had shifted below. The floodlights flickered once, then steadied. I turned off the transmitter, unplugged the power feed, and stepped back. Yet faint whispers continued through the disconnected speaker, threads of sound curling into half-words I almost recognized. When the clock struck midnight, the signal died completely. I waited another minute before breathing again. Morning arrived pale and colorless. The sky looked bleached, and the sea mirrored it perfectly. No wind, no motion. The supervisor handed me the log sheet without a word. Under the communications column, someone had written, "Signal received, response acknowledged." My signature sat beneath it. The ink was still damp. I hadn't touched a pen. I tore that page out and locked it in my drawer. The supervisor didn't ask why. Throughout the day, I tried convincing myself it was fatigue, sleep deprivation, and the pressure of isolation. Yet the world around me kept behaving as if tuned to some invisible pattern. Every metal joint gave a slow, measured creak, like breathing. The coffee machine hissed in the same rhythm as the waves. Even the crew spoke slower, their pauses aligning perfectly, like they shared a script I didn't know. At lunch, I asked if anyone had heard the radio last night. No one answered. They just stared until I stopped talking. That night, the mist returned earlier. I kept the comms turned off, the cables unplugged, every switch double-locked. Midnight approached, and I sat watching the clock, determined to outlast whatever tried to reach me. When the minute hand touched 12, the indicator light blinked again, green, soft, insistent. I refused to move. The radio emitted a faint scrape, then a voice whispered, "Please answer, we're still here." It sounded like all of them at once. Keller, the supervisor, maybe even my own. The echo filled the room like breath on glass. I held my hands over my ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside rather than around me. It wasn't asking anymore, it was remembering. Each syllable matched the cadence of my own voice when I made the daily check-ins. It was replaying me. I yanked the battery pack out. The whisper stopped mid-word. Somewhere below deck, metal groaned in protest, echoing upward through the floor. I sat perfectly still until dawn. When the sun rose, the fog thinned, leaving a faint shimmer across the surface. I went outside to check the antenna. Every wire looked intact, but the receiver dish was wet, not with rain, but with condensation that formed precise circular patterns, like fingerprints. The prints matched the shape of a human hand pressed outward from inside the metal. I wiped them clean and turned away, forcing myself not to look back at the dish again. Inside, the supervisor met me at the door. "You didn't answer the call, did you?" he asked. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried a quiet dread. I told him no. He nodded once. "Good. They only need you to say yes once." Then he walked off toward the bunk corridor, leaving the faint smell of seawater in his wake. For the rest of the day, I left the radio untouched. Still, every time I passed the control room, I could feel it waiting, silent and awake. The green light stayed off, but if I stood close enough, I could hear a heartbeat pulsing faintly inside the static, steady, patient, almost human. I told myself it was just interference, yet deep down I knew it wasn't interference that learns your name. That evening, as I finished my log, a thin line of moisture crept across the edge of the desk. It spelled a single word before evaporating. When the siren died halfway through the drill, every hair on my arm stood up. It wasn't supposed to stop. Those metallic screams always went on until the entire drill cycle ended, followed by a loud announcement from control. This time, there was only silence. Thick, wrong silence that clung to the rig like mist. I felt it in my teeth, the way the whole structure seemed to hold its breath. That's when I remembered Rule 4. Never look at the sea when the siren stops mid-drill. At first I thought maybe I'd imagined it. The wind hissed faintly through the railing, and the floor vibrated just enough to remind me we were miles above something alive and shifting. I kept my eyes locked on the rusted bolts in front of me. My instinct wanted to look out, to check what was wrong, to find the source. But every inch of me screamed that the rule existed for a reason. Something was out there, and it didn't want to be seen. Behind me, I heard Jones swearing under his breath. "Systems just cut out," he muttered. "Everything's frozen." He sounded more irritated than afraid, but his voice cracked near the end. We both knew how badly the last man who broke a rule had ended up. His name wasn't even in the records anymore, just a note in the manual about disciplinary disappearance. The rig lights flickered. A faint humming started from below, low and pulsing, almost like a heartbeat buried in metal. The silence between hums was worse. I clenched my fists, counting seconds in my head. Anything to stop myself from glancing toward the ocean. The rule echoed in my skull. Never look, not during a pause like this. Never. Then Jones said, "Screw this," and turned toward the railing. My gut dropped so fast it felt like falling. I opened my mouth to stop him, but the words tangled on my tongue. He leaned forward, just enough to see over the edge, and his body froze. His flashlight slipped from his hand and rolled against the deck. For a second, nothing moved except the beam slowly spinning. I didn't want to move closer, but my legs betrayed me. When I reached him, his eyes were wide open, mouth trembling, but no sound came out. His pupils were blown wide like he'd seen the end of the world reflected in water. Then slowly, he stepped forward, off the rig, into the mist below. The splash came faintly, like a whisper swallowed by the waves. I stood there alone, gripping the railing until my knuckles went white. I didn't look down. I couldn't. The humming stopped. The silence settled again, but this time it felt heavier, like it knew my name. My chest hurt from holding my breath. I stumbled backward, refusing to let my eyes wander past the platform lights. The siren suddenly blared back to life, shrieking so loud I fell to my knees. Systems rebooted, lights steadied, and the metallic heartbeat vanished beneath the usual noise. The voice from control came on, calm, distant, artificial, drill complete, remain inside. But Jones was gone. His ID tag lay by the railing, bent like someone had crushed it in a fist. Inside the crew quarters, the others avoided my gaze. No one asked where Jones went. They never do. Everyone just knows that when someone doesn't come back, it's because a rule was broken, and that means no one ever talks about it again. The rulebook doesn't punish you for silence. It rewards it. I tried sleeping, but every time my eyes closed, I saw a shimmer behind my eyelids, blue and pulsing, like light rippling across dark water. My body twitched awake each time. Around 3 a.m., the intercom crackled faintly, whispering static that almost formed words. It wasn't Control's voice. It sounded deeper, wetter, like someone speaking through water. I couldn't make out what it said, but I heard my name again. I pressed my palms over my ears, rocking slightly. The floor vibrated faintly beneath me, that same heartbeat returning, weaker this time. I didn't dare look toward the window. I'd covered it with my blanket earlier, sealing away the sea's view. Still, I could feel it watching, pressing against the thin wall like a living thing. When dawn came, the air smelled wrong, metallic and sweet, like something rotting beneath salt. The rig crew gathered for breakfast, pretending nothing was different, but their eyes told another story. One of the engineers whispered, "You heard the siren cut." Another shook his head sharply. "Don't, you'll make it remember." They both fell silent. Later that day, I checked the personnel logs. Jones's name had already vanished. No deletion trace, no record, just an empty gap between Johnson and Kane. I scrolled until my fingers shook. That's when I noticed a small note blinking in red at the bottom of the system. Visual protocol breach during mid-drill silence. File closed. My stomach turned cold. That night I sat on my bunk, holding the manual. I'd memorized every rule, but I read them again anyway. 11 of them. Each one stranger than the last. My eyes lingered on Rule 4. Never look at the sea when the siren stops mid-drill. Someone had underlined it twice in pen, like a personal warning. Maybe Jones had done it himself. The rig creaked as the tide shifted, the walls groaning softly, like lungs drawing air. I lay back, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between the hums of machinery. Somewhere far below, I heard something knock against the rig's supports, slow, steady, like it was knocking to be let in. I told myself it was debris, maybe a loose pipe, but deep down I knew better. Jones hadn't fallen. He'd been taken, claimed by whatever waits when the siren goes quiet. The sea never forgets a gaze. I closed my eyes and whispered the rule under my breath, one last time, as if saying it would keep me safe through the next drill. When the silence came again, I'd be ready, or at least I hoped I would be. That night the wind didn't sound right. Usually, the constant moan of air sliding across steel was enough to drown out the waves, but this time it felt reversed, as if the sea itself was breathing and the rig was listening. I couldn't shake the thought of Jones, or what might be left of him drifting below. Sleep wouldn't come, no matter how tightly I shut my eyes. That was when I heard it. My name, faint but clear, echoing from somewhere outside the window. At first I thought I was losing it. Exhaustion makes men hear things, especially out here. But the sound came again, softer, wet, like a whisper carried on bubbles. It slid under the door and through the walls, as if the whole rig had suddenly grown a voice. I froze, heart hammering, remembering Rule 5, never speak when you hear your name echo from the water. My throat went dry. I knew better than to answer. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when you're surrounded by endless black. I pressed my ear against the metal wall. The voice repeated, this time stretching my name like it was tasting it. Tom. It wasn't Jones's voice, though it tried to be. The tone was wrong, too smooth, too perfect, like a recording played underwater. I stepped back slowly, keeping my mouth shut. My pulse thudded in my ears. Every instinct screamed to call for help, to tell someone what I'd heard, but the rule forbade it. And after what happened to Jones, I wasn't about to test it. The lights flickered again, one by one, like something crawling through the electrical veins of the rig. I grabbed my flashlight, but the beam sputtered and died after 2 seconds. My room plunged into darkness, except for a faint blue glow leaking in through the edges of the window cover. It pulsed gently, the same rhythm as a heartbeat, the same rhythm I'd felt through the floor the night before. Whatever was outside, it wasn't gone. It was waiting. Tom, it whispered again, closer this time. I bit down on my tongue hard enough to taste blood. A soft tapping echoed against the wall behind my head, slow, deliberate. It wasn't metal against metal. It sounded more like nails. I backed away, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. The air inside the room, thickened, humid, and cold, carrying a smell of salt and decay. I wanted to shout, to tell it to stop, but I didn't. I couldn't. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I sat against the door, staring at the window, watching that faint blue light swell and dim. I kept my breathing shallow, forcing myself to stay quiet. When I finally gathered the courage to peel back a corner of the blanket covering the glass, the glow vanished instantly. Only black water stared back, and for a single heartbeat, something in that blackness blinked. By morning, the rest of the crew acted normal, as if nothing strange had happened. But I noticed something in their eyes. Each of them was exhausted, twitchy, avoiding conversation. Maybe they'd heard it too. Maybe the voice didn't just call me. During breakfast, I caught Harris glancing toward the sea every few minutes, his lips moving silently. I wanted to ask what he was saying, but the memory of the rule stopped me cold. Around noon, a system alarm went off, pressure drop in the lower pump bay. I was assigned to check it with Harris. Neither of us wanted to go down there, but protocol demanded it. The corridor leading to the bay was narrow and wet, the air filled with the constant drip of condensation. As we descended the last ladder, the ocean smell intensified, sharp and rotten. Harris muttered something under his breath. I told him not to speak, but he didn't seem to hear me. When we reached the pump room, the sound hit first, like someone humming underwater, deep and low. The water tanks vibrated slightly, the liquid inside glowing faintly blue. Harris froze. "Do you hear that?" he asked. His voice cracked in the middle. I opened my mouth to warn him, but before I could, a sound came from the drain below, a soft voice repeating his name, the same way it had called mine. "Harris." He stared at me, trembling. Did you hear?" He didn't finish. The voice repeated, louder, imitating me this time. "Harris, help me," it said, perfect and calm. Harris's face went pale. "Tom," he whispered. I shook my head violently, pointing at the ceiling, mouthing, "Don't speak." But it was too late. "Who's there?" he shouted. The moment his words left his mouth, the lights cut out. The glow beneath the floor brightened, flooding the room with an eerie blue haze. The water level in the tank started to rise, sloshing violently. Harris screamed and stumbled backward as something slammed against the glass from inside. A hand, pale, bloated, and webbed, slapped the surface, leaving streaks of slime. Then another, and another. They pressed their faces against the glass, faces that looked like ours, distorted, half-drowned, mouths open in silent screams. I ran. I didn't even think. I bolted up the ladder while Harris's shouts echoed below, merging with the voices from the tanks. "Help me," he yelled again, and the ocean answered back in perfect unison, mimicking his plea. By the time I reached the upper deck, the alarms had stopped, replaced by the sound of rushing water. When I looked back, the corridor behind me was flooded. Harris was gone. I collapsed near the bulkhead, chest heaving, trying to convince myself it was some hallucination caused by the pressure. But deep down, I knew what had happened. He'd broken Rule 5, and the sea had taken his voice, and him with it. I closed my eyes, and prayed that it wouldn't remember mine. That evening, Control made no mention of Harris. His name disappeared from the logs just like Jones's had. The others didn't ask. I saw one of them quietly scribble something in the manual's margins during dinner. Maybe another reminder. Maybe a warning for whoever comes next. The rig doesn't forgive mistakes. It just forgets you. Before sleeping, I checked my window again. The blanket was still there, though damp now, as if seawater had somehow seeped through the glass. A faint whisper drifted from below the floor, just a single word this time. My name, drawn out, waiting for a reply that would never come. I didn't speak. I wouldn't, but I knew the sea could wait forever. After Harris vanished, the rig grew quieter, but not in a comforting way. It felt like the silence had weight now, pressing against my chest every time I breathed. The ocean was calmer too, unnaturally calm, as if it were holding its breath, listening. We had lost 2 men in less than a week, but the crew still pretended nothing was wrong. That's how fear works out here. You don't fight it, you just fold it into the routine and keep your head down. That night, a heavy fog rolled in, thicker than anything I'd seen before. The floodlights barely reached the railing, their glow dissolving into a milky wall. Somewhere beneath the static hum of the generators, I swore I could hear faint voices, like murmurs bleeding through the mist. I told myself it was the wind playing tricks, but deep down I knew better. The rules existed for moments exactly like this, and Rule 6, never enter the control room after midnight, even if you hear someone inside. It was one I prayed I'd never have to test. Around 11:40 p.m., I was alone in the observation corridor doing a routine check when I heard it. A faint clang from above, followed by a low voice. "Tom?" It sounded distant but unmistakable, the kind of voice that shouldn't have existed anymore. "Jones." My entire body went cold. I knew it couldn't be him. I saw him step off the rig with my own eyes, disappearing into the fog. Still, the voice came again, closer this time, followed by the creak of the control room door opening. I froze. The control room was supposed to be locked after drills. Only the chief technician had clearance during night hours, and he was asleep 2 decks down. The sound of soft footsteps echoed through the steel floor panels above me, pacing slowly. "Tom," the voice called again, almost playful now. "We need your help up here." My flashlight trembled in my hand. Every instinct screamed to ignore it, but curiosity has a way of poisoning reason when you're alone. By 12:05, the voices had grown clearer, multiple now, overlapping whispers slipping through the ventilation shafts. I couldn't make out the words, but they carried rhythm, like a conversation. The kind that stops the moment you try to listen. I knew I should turn back, seal my cabin, wait until dawn, but I didn't. Something in me needed to see who or what was in that room. The hallway leading to the control room stretched longer than usual, or maybe it just felt that way. Every step echoed too loudly. The metal beneath my boots was cold, damp with condensation. The red emergency light flickered overhead, bathing everything in the dull glow of blood. When I reached the final corner, I stopped. The door was slightly ajar. A sliver of pale blue light seeped through the gap, pulsing like a heartbeat. I swallowed hard and leaned forward. The sound of typing came from inside, rapid, mechanical. Someone was using the consoles. That wasn't possible. The entire system was in lockdown mode after midnight. "Who's there?" I whispered before I could stop myself. The typing ceased instantly. Silence filled the corridor, stretching out until the only sound left was the faint thud of my own pulse. Then the door creaked wider on its own. Inside, the room was bathed in that same blue glow I'd seen under the water tanks. Screens flickered with lines of indecipherable data. Salt water dripped from the ceiling, pooling near the control panels, and sitting in the main chair, with his back to me, was Jones. His uniform was soaked, hair plastered to his skull, skin pale as candle wax. "System override complete," he said in a voice that didn't sound human anymore, too empty. My knees locked. "Jones?" I managed to whisper. He turned slightly, just enough for me to see half his face. His eye was sunken, black veins spreading from it like cracks in glass. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Not after midnight." Then he smiled, or something that tried to be a smile. I stumbled backward, slamming into the doorway. The light surged, screens flashing symbols I'd never seen before, like some kind of language from deep below. The sound came next, a wet slithering beneath the floor, something large moving inside the rig structure. The smell of brine and rot filled the air. I turned and ran, hearing the chair scrape behind me, slow and deliberate. "Come back," the voice said. "No longer Jones's. We need another to keep the system stable." The hallway lights blinked out one by one as I sprinted. The fog outside the windows glowed faintly blue, swirling as if alive. By the time I reached the lower deck, the control alarms blared. Every screen I passed showed fragments of data, scrolling endlessly. Coordinates, pressure readings, sonar spikes, each one pointing deeper into the trench below. Whatever had accessed the system wasn't trying to shut it down. It was calling something up. The rig trembled softly, almost like it was breathing again. I locked myself in the comms room and listened. Faintly through the vents, I heard the control room door slam shut. Then nothing. No voices, no footsteps, no mechanical hum, just the faint groan of metal under pressure. I stayed there until dawn, watching the first gray light filter through the fog, waiting for someone to come find me. No one did. When I finally dared to return to the control room in daylight, it was empty. The consoles were off, and everything was bone dry, as if no water had ever touched it. No sign of Jones's body, no logs showing activity after midnight. Only one thing was different. The manual lay open on the desk, pages warped from moisture. The ink bled across the paper, but one line was perfectly legible. Someone or something had written it fresh. He looked when he shouldn't have. He spoke when he shouldn't have. He entered when he shouldn't have. I closed the book, heart pounding. The words weren't written in pen. They were etched, burned into the page like salt crystallized by heat. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. Out here, silence is the only thing that keeps you alive. But that night, when the siren sounded again for the next drill, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The control room lights flickered on by themselves, even though no one was inside. And through the intercom, faint but unmistakable, I heard Jones's voice say, "System stable, sir. waiting for the next one to join us. I didn't sleep after that. I didn't sleep for 3 nights after what happened in the control room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jones's half-turned face glowing blue under that flickering light, his voice repeating my name like a broken transmission. The others noticed my exhaustion, but no one asked why. Maybe they were too afraid to. Maybe they'd all seen something too. On the rig, silence is survival. Questions get you remembered by the wrong things. By the 4th night, the weather changed again. The ocean was unnervingly still, glass-like, reflecting the fog above, as if the sky had sunk beneath us. The drills were suspended due to pressure instability, so most of the crew took shelter inside. I volunteered for night watch to stay busy, to stay away from sleep. It was better than lying in my bunk, waiting for whispers to crawl back through the walls. That's when I remembered Rule 7. Never trust a voice that knows your name, but not your shift. At first I didn't understand what that meant. Every voice on the rig knew everyone's schedule. It was logged, tracked, monitored. But the rules weren't about people. They were about the others. The ones that sounded close but weren't. The ones that learned too fast. Still, I tried to convince myself it was just another superstition. Something old-timers passed down to keep rookies paranoid. That illusion lasted until the intercom buzzed. "Tom, it's Mason," the voice said. Mason was my relief operator for the night shift. "You can head down early if you want. I'm clocking in now." Static cracked between the words, but his tone was calm. Too calm. I checked the time. 2:47. Mason wasn't scheduled until 4 o'clock. My stomach tightened. "You're early," I said, testing him. "We switched shifts last week, remember?" There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice chuckled softly. "Right. Forgot about that." Mason never forgot anything. Not times, not details. Not the kind of man who jokes about shift swaps. The sound of that laugh made my skin crawl. It was close, but not quite human. Like someone breathing through a thin layer of water. I didn't reply. I muted the channel, stood up, and stared at the intercom speaker, waiting. A minute later, it clicked back on by itself. "Tom," it said again. "Quieter now. Why'd you turn me off?" The static behind it pulsed like a heartbeat. I backed away until my shoulders hit the cold metal wall. My flashlight lay on the desk, beside the logbook. I grabbed it with trembling hands and shone it toward the door. The fog outside the porthole swirled, thick and silver, and for the briefest second, I thought I saw a shadow move past it. Tall, jointed wrong, its outline rippling like it wasn't made of flesh. The intercom clicked again. "It's cold out here," the voice said. "Let me in." That's when I heard footsteps above me. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The ceiling panels creaked under the weight. I killed the light, heart hammering, and crouched behind the console. The footsteps stopped directly above the door. Then something scraped against the steel, like claws testing it. I didn't breathe. I didn't dare move. A wet tapping followed, 3 times spaced evenly. Then silence. The intercom crackled one last time. "Guess I'll see you at shift change," it whispered, and the line went dead. When I finally dared to move, it was nearly dawn. The corridors smelled faintly of brine again, and a thin film of moisture coated every surface near the door. I found tracks, footprints, faint but visible, leading toward the stairs. Not boots. Bare, webbed impressions splayed wide like something meant for swimming. I cleaned them before anyone else saw, heart pounding so hard it made my chest ache. At breakfast, Mason sat across from me, alive and human, tired but normal. He hadn't spoken to me since the last drill. "Rough night?" he asked, half smiling. I stared at him for a long moment. "You didn't come early, did you?" I said carefully. He frowned. "No, I was out cold till 10 minutes ago." I nodded slowly, forcing a laugh. "Right, must have been a dream." He didn't question it. No one does anymore. The day passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The air on the rig felt heavier, like the pressure from below was climbing. Equipment hummed louder than usual, as if straining against something. When night fell again, I refused to take the same shift. I told Control I was feeling sick and stayed in my cabin. That was when I realized my mistake. The thing outside didn't need a schedule to find me anymore. It already knew my name. Around midnight, the intercom came alive again, but this time, it wasn't pretending. The voice that spoke was distorted, deep and gurgling, each syllable dripping with static. "Tom," it said, dragging out the word until it didn't sound like a name anymore. "You didn't come to relieve me." I froze in bed, blanket pulled to my chin, every instinct screaming to destroy the intercom. Then I remembered what happens when you interact. The rules aren't suggestions, they're barriers. And once broken, the sea never lets go. The voice kept talking. "It's not fair," it said softly. "You left me out here." The air grew damp, fog curling through the seams of the door. I could hear the faint sound of dripping, steady, rhythmic. The walls pulsed faintly, with that same blue light again, seeping through from somewhere deep inside the rig. My chest tightened. "You're supposed to help," the voice said, now almost whispering in my ear. "You always help." I covered my ears and started counting seconds out loud, anything to drown it out. 1, 2, 3. My voice shook. The whisper stopped. For a long time there was nothing. Then a slow knock echoed from the other side of the door. 3 times. I didn't move, didn't blink. The last knock was softer, followed by a wet dragging sound moving away down the hall. When morning came, I found the corridor outside covered in condensation. The doorframe was slick with salt. The intercom light was still blinking. I smashed it with a wrench before reporting for duty. Control didn't ask questions. They never do. The logs didn't show any calls received overnight. I checked 3 times to be sure. Nothing. That evening, I noticed something strange on the roster board. My name was listed twice, once for my current shift, and once 2 hours earlier. Same ID, same clearance. The duplicate entry flickered faintly, as if the system couldn't decide which version was real. I reached for it, but the display shorted out, leaving the screen dark. My reflection stared back at me, pale and hollow-eyed. For a moment, I thought I saw something move behind me, something that smiled with my face. I didn't turn around. I just whispered the rule under my breath. Never trust a voice that knows your name but not your shift. Because now it wasn't just voices anymore. It was something learning, something that wanted to take my place. And it was getting closer. By the time we reached the next rotation cycle, the rig no longer felt like it belonged to us. The walls sweated even when the air was cold, and the fog outside never cleared, day or night. There was no horizon anymore. Just a vast, colorless nothing that swallowed the sea whole. Even the gulls had stopped coming. It was as if the world had shrunk down to this platform, and the rest had drowned beneath it. The ocean was watching, and we were all beginning to feel it. After the incident with the voice, I started noticing things in the glass. It began small, a flicker, a ripple, like condensation shifting the wrong way. I'd wipe it clean, and the movement would stop. But then I realized it only happened when I was alone. Every reflective surface, portholes, gauges, even the slick sheen of oil on metal, carried a faint shimmer that pulsed when I breathed. Once, I caught my reflection blinking a second too late. Just once. That was enough to start the dread crawling back through my spine. It was during a maintenance check near the north deck, when I remembered Rule 8, never step into a reflection that moves before you do. The words were written in thick black marker on the back of an old clipboard, half scratched away by rust. I'd seen the rule before but ignored it, assuming it was a leftover joke from some previous crew. Now it didn't feel funny anymore. Nothing did. Every time I walked past the observation glass, I kept my eyes down, afraid to see what might be staring back. That evening, Mason asked if I was sleeping at all. I told him no. He laughed. tried to joke it off, but his hands were shaking. He'd seen it too, the reflections moving wrong. He said he caught his shadow lagging half a second behind him in the mirror near the mess hall sink. When he turned, it didn't, just stood there, breathing. He smashed the mirror with a wrench and refused to wash his hands in there again. "It's not the glass," he whispered. "It's what's behind it." I didn't laugh. None of us did anymore. By the third night, the reflections weren't waiting for us to look at them. They started showing up in places they shouldn't. Puddles where there was no leak, polished metal that hadn't been cleaned in weeks, even the black of the coffee in my cup. The worst part was how familiar they looked. Every reflection was slightly wrong, a twitch too sharp, a blink too slow, a mouth that smiled when I didn't. They were studying us, learning the rhythm of our movements like a hunter memorizing its prey. That night, the fog outside thickened until visibility dropped to nothing. I was alone in the corridor when I saw something shimmer on the steel floor. It was a puddle, circular and still, though there hadn't been any condensation in that part of the rig for days. I tried to step around it, but then I saw my reflection inside it, except it wasn't copying me. It was standing still. My reflection's eyes moved, watching me, but its body didn't breathe. I froze, terrified. Then it smiled. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs refused to move. The reflection raised its hand slowly, and the air around me grew colder, heavy with pressure, like the deep ocean had forced its way into the hallway. I stumbled backward, but the reflection stepped forward. The puddle rippled outward, and for a moment the floor beneath me didn't feel solid anymore. I blinked, and it was gone. Just an empty corridor, just metal and fog. But I could still feel something pressing against the other side of the floor, something waiting. I reported it to control, but they ignored me. Said it was fatigue, stress, dehydration, all the things they always say when they're scared but can't admit it. But I wasn't the only one anymore. By morning, 2 engineers were missing. Their cabins were empty, untouched. The only thing left behind was condensation on the mirrors, perfect handprints, all facing inward, as if someone had tried to climb into the glass. We sealed off the rooms and stopped sleeping alone after that. Later that week, while inspecting the filtration valves, I found another puddle, but this one was different. It wasn't reflecting the room I was standing in. It was showing something deeper, darker. I could see movement, slow, graceful shapes gliding beneath the surface, like shadows swimming under a frozen lake. Then I saw faces, dozens of them. Some I recognized, the missing crew, their eyes open, staring upward from below, mouths moving soundlessly, reaching toward the surface of the reflection, as though begging to be pulled out. I ran. Didn't finish the inspection, didn't write a report. Some things you don't document, not because you're afraid to be believed, but because you're afraid you will be. I told Mason what I saw, and he didn't even blink. "They're trying to replace us," he said quietly. "They want to come through." He pointed at the fogged window beside us. For a split second, I thought I saw 2 silhouettes instead of one, mine, and something standing just a step behind it. That night, I boarded up the mirror in my cabin with duct tape and a spare towel. I slept with my back to the wall, eyes open, counting the seconds between the groans of the rig. Around 3 a.m., I heard a faint tapping, soft, rhythmic, coming from the mirror. I held my breath. The sound grew louder, closer, until the mirror's surface began to shudder. Then a voice, faint, muffled, identical to mine, whispered through the cracks, "Let me out." The glass pulsed once, then twice. I gripped the wrench beside my bed and hit the mirror as hard as I could. The glass shattered, but behind it wasn't the wall. It was water, thick, dark, and impossibly deep. Something moved beneath it, pale fingers, reaching up toward the break. I stumbled backward, heart slamming in my chest as the reflection, my reflection, pressed its face against the inside of the broken mirror. Its eyes met mine, and it smiled wider than human jaws should allow. Then it vanished, leaving nothing but shards and dripping salt water on the floor. By morning, my cabin was sealed for maintenance. I was moved to a bunk near the lower deck. Less reflective surfaces, less glass, but even there, I could still hear faint knocks echoing from the pipes at night, like something was crawling through the plumbing, following the sound of my heartbeat. I stopped drinking water that wasn't from a sealed bottle. I stopped looking at windows altogether. You don't realize how many reflections you live with until you have to avoid them, until you start wondering which one is still you. The rig's cameras began to fail. After that, every feed showed static, except one. The corridor outside my old room. On that feed, a figure still walked past the door every night, at exactly 3 a.m. The system tagged it as Tom Heat, active, but I was in my new bunk, wide awake, watching it move, watching me walk where I wasn't. The reflection had taken its first steps. Now when I see my reflection, I don't trust it. I move slow, wait to see if it moves first, because I know what happens if it does. The last man who broke this rule didn't vanish. He was found floating face down in the ballast tank, his skin pale and glassy, as if his body had been pressed flat and peeled from a mirror's surface. The official report said equipment failure. But I know the truth. Rule 8, never step into a reflection that moves before you do. Because it's not your reflection anymore. It's waiting for an opening. And the moment you blink, it steps through. By the end of that week, the fog had settled into the rig like a disease. The air was thicker, the metal colder, and the hum of the generators had taken on a strange rhythmic cadence, like breathing. Every corridor echoed longer than it should have, as if the rig itself was hollowing out beneath us. When I walked at night, I could hear faint murmurs rising from the lower decks, words just beyond comprehension. I knew what they were, but I forced myself not to understand, because I remembered Rule 9, never acknowledge the voices coming from the lower deck. It was a rule I'd always thought was metaphorical, a warning about hallucinations or pressure-induced madness. But after the reflection incident, metaphor didn't exist anymore. Mason and I sealed off the bottom deck 2 days ago, after a maintenance worker named Cole went missing. His ID badge was found near the hydraulic pumps, smeared with something thick and black, like oil mixed with blood. The security feed cut out at 2:13. Right before it did, a faint shape was visible in the frame. Something crouched beside him, whispering near his ear. Since then, the voices hadn't stopped. They started as faint drifts of static through the intercom, like someone half-tuned into the wrong frequency. But at night, they got louder, deeper. They whispered names. They whispered mine. Sometimes it sounded like Mason. Other times, it sounded like Cole begging to be let back up. The first time I heard my name spoken clearly, I nearly dropped the wrench I was holding. It wasn't the sound itself that terrified me. It was how close it was, like the voice was standing right behind me, speaking softly into the back of my neck. We disconnected the intercom system the next morning, but the voices didn't stop. They seeped through the vents, the pipes, even through the walls. One night, I pressed my ear against the metal bulkhead, and I swear I heard a conversation happening below. Full sentences, laughter, footsteps pacing. But the lower deck was sealed. No power, no lights. Just black water, pressing against the walls from the outside. Mason told me not to mention it. "You'll draw attention," he said. "They can hear you when you say their name." I didn't ask who they were. I didn't need to. We'd all seen enough by then to know that the rules weren't arbitrary. They were containment. Each one a line drawn in the dark to keep something old and unseen from crossing into us. The voices weren't trying to scare us anymore. They were inviting us, promising warmth, escape, forgiveness. Sometimes they even mimicked my own voice, whispering things I'd never said aloud. "Come down," it would murmur. "You'll understand. You'll finally see." On the fourth night, Mason broke. I woke to find his bunk empty, the door half open, the corridor wet with condensation. I followed the trail, slow, cautious, until I reached the stairwell to the lower deck. The hatch was unsealed, bolts slick with moisture, and from below came that whispering chorus again. Hundreds of voices, overlapping, rising and falling like waves. I shouted his name once, just once. My voice vanished into the dark, swallowed before it could echo back. Then from below, Mason's voice answered, faint, distant, wrong. I'm fine, it said. It's beautiful down here. I nearly went after him. I had one foot on the first step when the entire rig shuddered, a deep vibration rippling through the steel, like a heartbeat. The lights flickered, and a low groan echoed from below, not mechanical, not natural. It sounded alive. I stumbled back, slammed the hatch shut, and sealed it with the emergency lock. The voices stopped instantly, like they'd been cut off mid-breath, but I could still feel something moving beneath the metal, tracing the edge of the door with soft, deliberate pressure, like fingertips against glass. After that, I started hearing the voices in other places, in the static of the radio, in the hiss of the vents, even in the sound of my own breathing through the mask. They whispered stories, things I shouldn't have known. They told me the fog wasn't weather, but breath, that the ocean wasn't below us anymore, it was around us, stretching through every pipe and crevice, that the rig was sinking, piece by piece, without us realizing. They told me Mason wasn't gone, just changed. They said he'd found something beneath the lowest deck, something that wanted to come up. I tried to warn Control, but the line went dead, halfway through the transmission. When I checked the logs, there was no record of my call, as if I'd never spoken. That's when I realized it wasn't about communication. The voices weren't just heard, they were collected. Each word spoken to them gave them form, weight, a foothold. Maybe that's why Rule 9 existed, not to protect our sanity, but to keep the voices from becoming real. Every acknowledgement fed them, gave them names, and names had power out here. 2 nights later, I woke to a sound I hadn't heard in weeks, humming, not from machinery, but human, low, steady, coming from the vents above my bunk. I climbed up slowly, heart hammering, and peered into the grill. It was dark, but I saw movement, something pale crawling through the ductwork, dragging itself by its arms. Its face pressed against the metal for a moment, and I saw Mason's eyes staring back. Come down, it whispered again, in his voice, but not his tone. It's waiting. I backed away, trembling, and turned off the cabin lights. The vents went silent, but I could hear the ocean roaring far below, closer now, like it had crept inside the rig's skeleton. Every sound was amplified, every breath, every whisper. The boundary between above and below was fading. I started marking time by the sound of the creaks, but even that rhythm began to shift. It no longer matched the sea, it matched a heartbeat. When I finally slept, I dreamed of the lower deck, of rusted stairs, leading into an endless dark filled with whispering figures. Mason was there, smiling through the fog. His skin shimmered like oil, his voice hollow and full of echoes. He pointed upward, to where the ceiling should have been, and I saw water dripping down like rain from above. Then I woke, and realized my pillow was soaked with salt water. It wasn't a dream. The ocean had started bleeding through the structure. Now the voices are constant. They no longer whisper, they hum resonant and steady, a sound you don't hear but feel in your teeth and bones. Sometimes I catch myself mouthing their words, even when I'm awake. It's like they're syncing with my thoughts, replacing them one by one. I don't know how long I can resist. I keep writing, keep remembering the rules, because once I forget one, it's over. The rig isn't just haunted, it's a lung breathing the sea through us. If you ever find yourself here, and you hear a voice calling your name from below, don't answer it. Don't even look toward the sound. The moment you acknowledge it, it knows you're listening. And once it knows that, it never stops. Rule 9, never acknowledge the voices coming from the lower deck, because they don't want to be heard. They want to be answered. The power failures began 3 days after Mason disappeared. At first we thought it was just the generators struggling under the cold, but then the blackouts started happening only during the drills. The sirens would wail, the fog outside would pulse like a living thing, and one by one the lights would die. The first time it happened, I froze because I remembered Rule 10, keep the lights on during the drills, even if they tell you to turn them off. I hadn't understood what it meant before. Now I think I do. During the blackout, everything felt wrong. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, heavy, vibrating in the bones of the rig. You could feel it breathing. When the emergency lights flickered back, tools were in different places, and doors we'd sealed were open again. Sometimes there were wet footprints on the floor, leading from nowhere to nowhere. We blamed the humidity, our nerves, the isolation. But deep down, we all knew. Something moved in the dark when the lights went out. Something that didn't belong on this rig. Control had started sending automated commands through the intercom, distorted messages repeating in that same static-laced tone. Power conservation mode active. Lights off. Remain calm. We stopped obeying after the second drill. I was in the corridor then, flashlight trembling in my hand, when I saw movement in the reflection of a metal pipe. Something was crawling just beyond the emergency glow, dragging itself along the floor. Its outline was human, but its limbs bent the wrong way. When my beam of light touched it, it vanished, like it had never been there. I stopped breathing until the lights came back on. When they did, everything was still, silent, but the floor was wet, slick, salty, and smelling faintly of rust and rot. That's when I realized the darkness wasn't just absence. It was space. It opened a door to something beneath, something that wanted in. Keeping the lights on wasn't about seeing. It was about sealing. The glow was a barrier, a thin skin of warmth, holding back the ocean's hunger. Every blackout wasn't an accident. It was an invitation. The next day, Ramirez from maintenance ignored the rule, said we were wasting fuel, that Control's orders were automatic for a reason. During the next drill, he shut off half the main lights manually. The moment he did, the siren cut out mid-tone. The air pressure dropped so fast, my ears popped. Then from the dark end of the hall, something moved. Slow, deliberate, wet. We heard his voice once, a scream choked short, like water rushing into lungs. When the lights came back on, he was gone. Only his boots remained, filled with seawater. We sealed that section off, but the smell stayed, a mix of salt, iron, and something sweet, like decay. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ramirez's reflection in the puddle by the door, his face twisted, his eyes still moving. When I blinked, the reflection changed positions, closer every time. I left the lights on after that. Didn't matter if the others complained or said I was wasting power. The dark isn't empty here. It's crowded. The next blackout wasn't during a drill. It came without warning. A single flicker, then total void. I reached for my flashlight, but the beam refused to turn on, as if the darkness was swallowing the light itself. The emergency systems didn't kick in. The silence stretched, and in it, I heard whispers. Not from below this time, from inside the walls. The metal vibrated with slow, dragging footsteps, moving closer. I felt a drop of water hit my neck, then another, then a slow, cold breath brushed against my ear. Something whispered, "Turn them off." The voice sounded like mine. I stumbled backward, fumbling for the manual breaker. When I finally found it, I slammed it up, and light exploded through the hall. The corridor was empty, but the wall beside me was soaked, glistening with seawater that shouldn't have been there. I looked down and saw handprints pressed into the floor, deep and wet, leading toward the stairwell. I followed them only as far as the first step. The air there shimmered, like heat above asphalt, and beyond it, everything bent wrong, like the world was being pulled through itself. We stopped counting days after that. The drills came more often, sometimes twice a night. Each one louder, longer, angrier. The rig was sinking, not physically, but into something deeper than the ocean. The fog grew darker, denser, until the floodlights couldn't pierce it. During one blackout, I saw faces in the glow of the red alarms. Faces pressed against the glass of the observation room, mouths open, eyes black and hollow. I counted 12 of them before the power cut again. When the light returned, there were 13. I think one of them was Mason. That realization broke something inside me. I went to the main control room and hardwired every circuit to bypass automatic shutdown. The system protested, warning me about overload, but I didn't care. I'd rather burn this place out than sit in the dark again. The others didn't stop me. They'd seen enough to know it wasn't superstition. It was survival. For a while it worked. The rig glowed like a beacon in the fog, humming with defiance. But the sea doesn't forgive defiance for long. 2 nights ago, the fog began to glow back. Faint, pulsing, alive, like it was mimicking our lights. The sensors started picking up movement just outside the perimeter. Not fish, not weather, shapes. Human shapes, dozens of them, walking slowly around the rig, their outlines flickering in and out like projections. When we dimmed the lights to test, they came closer. When we brightened them, they stopped. The fog was breathing with us, matching our rhythm, watching, waiting. Then last night, the alarms blared again. But this time, the voice on the intercom wasn't automated. It was Ramirez. His voice clear and calm. "Power overload," he said. "Shut them down. You'll drown us all." The others froze. Some reached for the switches. I screamed at them not to. The siren wailed, the lights flickered, and the air pressure shifted again. That deep, lung-crushing pull that meant the sea was getting closer. I grabbed a flare gun and fired it straight into the dark corridor. For a split second, I saw everything. Figures, hundreds, crawling along the walls, their faces half-formed, their bodies dripping with water, each of them wearing the faces of the ones we'd lost, each of them staring straight at me. Then the flare went out, and the lights followed. I don't know how long the blackout lasted. Could have been seconds, could have been hours. When the lights finally returned, I was alone. No bodies, no sound. Just the distant hum of the rig's heart still beating. The fog outside pulsed one more time, then faded to gray. I sat there, shaking, repeating the rule under my breath like a prayer. Rule 10, keep the lights on during the drills, even if they tell you to turn them off, because when the lights die, the sea remembers, and it always comes to reclaim what it's lost. When I first read Rule 11, I thought it was a joke, some final warning scribbled by a paranoid worker who'd spent too long in the dark. But now, sitting in the control room, as the storm howled outside and the drilling bay lights flickered like dying stars, I could hear it. It wasn't coming through the speakers or the wind. It was closer, threading through the metal like a whisper from the rig itself. It said my name. Mark. Just that. Calm, familiar. I froze, remembering the exact words. Never acknowledge the voice that knows your name. My breath fogged the window as I stared out at the skeletal cranes swaying above the platform. There was no one outside, just rain and shadow. But the voice came again, softer this time, from behind the bulkhead door. I told myself it was the wind bending the metal, but deep down, I knew the wind doesn't call your name the way someone you love once did. I forced myself to focus on the console. The dials were still dancing erratically, the depth sensors reading impossible numbers. We hadn't drilled this deep before, not even close. Something was alive beneath us. I could feel it pulsing through the steel. Then the voice spoke again, closer, right behind me now, and it said, "You've done well, Mark, but you need to let me in." I didn't turn around. The lights above me buzzed, then dimmed to a sickly amber glow. My reflection in the glass looked pale and fractured, like I was splitting into 2 versions of myself, one obeying the rules, one listening to that voice. I thought of Jenkins, the one who'd vanished after breaking Rule 7. They'd found his boots outside the airlock, but nothing else. No blood, no body, no trace. Only a faint recording loop of his own voice whispering his name again and again. The air in the room grew thick, humming like a low electrical current through my teeth. "Mark," the voice said again, sharper now, demanding. I pressed my palms over my ears, but the sound didn't stop. It was inside me. I reached for the emergency radio, trying to call base, but all I heard was static layered with my own breathing. Then, through the static, a faint reply, "This is Control. Mark, we read you. Step outside. It's safe now." My heart stopped. Control never used first names. Ever. The storm outside had cut us off for hours. Whoever, or whatever, that was, it wasn't Control. I whispered the words aloud like a prayer. Never acknowledge the voice that knows your name. The instant I said it, the voice went silent, as if realizing I'd caught its lie. But silence wasn't safety here. On this rig, silence meant it was already inside. The door behind me clicked open on its own. I didn't move. My reflection in the glass smiled before I did. Its mouth moved a split second earlier, and I saw the words form before I heard them. "You can't stay here forever, Mark." Then the lights died completely, plunging everything into black. I could feel the vibration beneath the floor intensify, the ocean grinding against the metal legs of the rig, something vast shifting below. I took one step toward the exit hatch, every muscle screaming to run, but the whisper came again. Not from outside this time, but through the intercom right above my head. It sounded exactly like my own voice, tired, trembling, broken. "Please, Mark, just answer me. I don't want to be alone down here," I nearly replied before catching myself, biting my tongue until I tasted blood. The rule wasn't a warning, it was a trap. The moment you answer, it becomes you. The floor groaned beneath my boots. A wet, resonant thud echoed from below, followed by the faint hiss of pressurized air. The rig was sinking, just slightly, but enough to know that something below was tugging us downward. I reached the stairwell, but the voice followed, not through sound, but through the weight of every shadow I passed. I could feel it watching me through the dark corners, patient, smiling, at the final door to the lifeboat deck. I stopped. The handle was warm. On the other side of that door, I could see a faint glow, like dawn breaking. But we were hundreds of miles from shore, and the storm outside was endless. I took one breath, one final look at the dead control room behind me, and whispered to myself, "Don't acknowledge it. Don't let it win." The voice whispered back, perfect in tone and timing, "Goodbye, Mark." I stepped through the door. There was no deck, no storm, just black water stretching into forever, swallowing the rig's reflection as it sank below the surface. I looked down and saw my own face staring back, but it was smiling. That was when I realized the truth. The rules were never meant to protect us. They were meant to keep it contained, and we'd been drilling straight into its cage. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.